Alan Hughes was 57 when he disappeared from his old life, not in the literal sense but emotionally, spiritually, and slowly over time. A decade ago, he had been married. He had a house with a porch, a stable job in a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio, and a small circle of friends who talked more about weather than dreams. But the marriage ended with quiet resentment. His wife left first, then his son, who barely called. Work became automated. He took early retirement, and one morning, while sipping lukewarm coffee in a silent kitchen, Alan realized he had no reason to stay. He sold everything. No grand speech, no farewell party. Just a one-way ticket to Southeast Asia, Thailand. He had once seen a photo in a travel magazine: green rice fields, temples glinting in sunlight, and a caption that read, "The land of smiles." He didn't want smiles. He wanted quiet. He wanted to vanish into something older than himself. His flight landed in Chiang Mai. The city was alive with color and chaos: monks with orange robes, motorbikes weaving through alleys, lanterns floating into the night sky. For a while, he stayed in a small guest house near the mountains, reading and walking. But the city still felt too fast. Alan wanted something slower, something forgotten. He found a village, not on any tourist map. It was 4 hours outside the city, near the Laotian border, a place where phones barely worked and everyone knew everyone's name. They didn't know his. Not yet. The first days were strange. People stared. Children ran from him. The local language was thick with dialect. But slowly, a rhythm formed. Alan would buy fruit from the old woman near the well. He would sit by the river and watch boys fish with their bare hands. And every morning, he passed a modest wooden house where 3 women laughed loudly at sunrise. They were inseparable. Best friends, he learned. Malai, the eldest, gentle and reserved. She worked with herbs and oils. Her hands smelled like jasmine. Tawan, the bold one, she drove a scooter too fast, played music too loud, and wore American t-shirts with phrases she couldn't read. And Lynn, the quiet center of them all, a schoolteacher who barely spoke English but had eyes that seemed to understand everything. They didn't approach Alan, not at first. But the village is small. Paths cross, smiles soften, curiosity builds. It began with food. Malai brought him soup one rainy evening. Too cold, she said, in broken English. You eat. Then came Tawan, laughing at his attempts to ride a motorbike. Too slow, she teased, then handed him mango slices. And Lynn just listened. She always listened. Weeks turned into months. Alan stopped thinking about Ohio. The silence inside him began to lift, not with noise, but with warmth. With shared dinners, with laughter that needed no translation. He started fixing things around the village, helping repair roofs, setting up water filters, translating documents at the school. He wasn't a guest anymore. He belonged, in a quiet way, but he never expected what came next. It happened one evening in late spring, when the air was thick with the scent of lemongrass and smoke. Alan had just finished repairing a broken fence near the village temple. His hands were sore, his shirt damp from the heat. He returned home expecting silence but instead found Malai, Tawan, and Lynn waiting on his porch. They had prepared a meal: sticky rice, grilled fish, coconut soup. Tawan poured tea. Malai handed him a wet towel. Lynn just smiled. No one spoke for a while. Then Malai said quietly, "We won't talk." Alan nodded, and sure. He noticed they weren't joking. Tawan, usually so quick to laugh, looked serious. Lynn leaned forward. "You are a good man," she said slowly. "Kind, quiet, patient. Village, he's this." Alan smiled awkwardly. "Thank you. I'm just trying to help." Malay looked down, then said something in Thai. Tawan translated. She said, "In our village, sometimes women who are close like sisters choose one man." Alan blinked. "What do you mean, choose? To build family?" Tawan said, voice even. "Together?" The words didn't land at first. It sounded ceremonial, like folklore. But then Lynn spoke again, barely above a whisper. "All 3 of us, we want to be with you." Alan felt time slow. He tried to laugh. "Is this a joke?" They shook their heads. Malai reached for his hand. "We live simple," she said. "But we have no men, no husbands, no children, no future. If you say yes, we share everything. Not just love, life, work, family. Alan pulled his hand back gently. His heart pounded. I'm old. He said, I'm 57. Molly smiled. You still breathe. Tawin added, we not need perfect. We need real. Alan stood up pacing. This would never work in America. This is not America, Lynn replied, softly. They didn't push. They didn't beg. They simply left the food, stood, and said think. No hurry. Alan didn't sleep that night. He thought about Ohio, about his failed marriage, about his empty apartment back home. He thought about how, for the first time in years, he had stopped feeling like a shadow. But this was something else. Entirely. 3 women, 3 best friends, not competing, not confused, but united, choosing him. It felt like something from a myth, or a scandal, or a dream, and yet it was real. And this village, there were no scripts, no templates, just survival, trust, and the small daily miracles of sharing life with others. Alan sat outside until sunrise, staring at the hills. He didn't know what his answer would be, but for the first time in a long time he wanted to say yes. The village hadn't seen a wedding in over 7 years. But this was different. 3 women, 1 man. No altars had a precedent. There were no forms to fill out, no traditions carved in stone, just murmurs, curiosity, and quiet blessings. When Alan told them yes, it was not a loud moment, no dramatic music. Just a long pause, a deep breath, and 3 women slowly, smiling, their eyes shining with something between disbelief and relief. They embraced him, one after another, Molly first, gently resting her forehead against his chest. Then Tawin, who hugged him tight and whispered, "You brave." Lynn stood back, tears forming. Then took his hand and nodded. Preparations began. Quietly, women in the village brought fabric and beads. They sewed 3 simple dresses in deep forest green, the color of longevity. Men built a wooden arch near the riverbank. The children gathered flowers every morning and lined the dirt path from Alan's porch to the water. No one laughed at the idea. No one shamed them. Perhaps the world outside would never understand. But here, in this place carved out of time, love wasn't bound by paperwork or precedent. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was overcast, but the air was warm. The smell of jasmine and rain lingered. Alan wore a loose white tunic and simple sandals. His beard had grown out, and he looked different now, less like a foreigner, more like a man who had shed something invisible. Molly walked first, hair braided with small white flowers. Tawin followed, her usual boldness softened by emotion. Lynn came last, quiet as always, holding a small woven basket of herbs. There was no music, only birdsong and the sound of the river behind them. An elder woman spoke a few words, something about unity, balance, and choosing each other freely. Then Alan was asked if he would take them not just as wives, but as equal companions in life. He answered simply, yes, all of you, together. The villagers clapped softly. Someone passed around tea. A few laughed, a few cried. The ceremony dissolved into a meal under the open sky. Sticky rice, fresh papaya, grilled meat on banana leaves. Children played in the water. Alan sat between the 3 women, their fingers occasionally brushing against his. There were no rings, no first dance, but there was warmth, and truth, and the strange certainty that something impossible had just happened quietly, beautifully, without asking permission from the world. That night, the 4 of them returned to the house they had slowly built together over the last few months. It wasn't big. Just 3 rooms, a shared kitchen, and a porch that faced the rice fields. Alan sat on the porch, the sounds of laughter and cooking behind him. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, I didn't know life could begin again, but maybe it just did. The days after the wedding unfolded without ceremony. No honeymoon, no applause, just life. But life, when shared with people who choose each other every day, becomes something holy. Alan woke early, always before the sun. Molly would already be at the stove grinding herbs. Lynn would be sweeping the front porch. Tawin, never a morning person, would appear last, yawning, hair tangled, smiling with her eyes. They moved in rhythm. No schedule, no calendar, but an unspoken flow, like music. Alan tended to the goats and fixed fences. Lin taught children beneath a tree near the edge of the village. Malay healed neighbors with herbs and warm hands. Tawan sold handmade soaps at the market 3 villages over, her scooter always a little too fast, her laughter echoing down the road. Some nights, Alan slept beside Malay, calm and steady. Other nights, Tawan would drag him into bed after dinner, whispering jokes until they both fell asleep. Lin often waited quiet until Alan joined her in the back room, where silence was its own kind of closeness. There was no jealousy. That surprised him. Each woman had her own way of loving. Each gave him something different and asked for nothing more than presence, not perfection, not ownership, just a shared life. One afternoon, Tawan stood by the garden, holding a strip of cotton soaked in sweat. She looked pale. "It's too hot," she muttered, before collapsing gently into Alan's arms. They rushed to Malay, who ran her hands over Tawan's belly. "She's pregnant," she said. Softly, Alan froze. A week later, Malay confirmed the same for herself. Then, a month after that, Lin pressed Alan's hand to her stomach without a word. 3 children, 3 mothers, 1 man. He laughed and cried in the same breath. The village rejoiced. The women made amulets to protect the babies. Elders offered names rooted in seasons and rivers. Alan built cribs by hand, sanded each one slowly, naming the wood slats as if they were already living beings. But with joy came fear. What if something went wrong? What if he wasn't strong enough? What if they resented him? What if the world outside came knocking? But the women never wavered. "You're not alone," Malay said, holding his face between her hands. "We carry this together." And they did. Alan learned how to boil herbs for morning sickness. He rubbed swollen feet. He talked to the growing bellies at night like a fool, whispering dreams he didn't know he had. Tawan would laugh. "Your accent will be first thing they hear." Poor babies. Lin would just hold his hand and close her eyes. They were no longer lovers. They were a family. And families, real ones, aren't built on blood or legality. They're built on ordinary days, lived with extraordinary care. Rain came early that year. The clouds hung low over the rice fields, and thunder rolled across the mountains like distant drums. Malay went into labor first. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She gripped Alan's hand and breathed like the earth itself was inside her chest. The midwives came. Lin boiled water. Tawan sang softly from the doorway, her own belly swelling with life. After hours that felt like lifetimes, a cry cut through the storm. "A boy!" Alan held him for the first time in shaking arms, whispering the only words he could find. "You're real. You're here." The boy's eyes were dark like Malay's, and he blinked slowly, like he already knew the world would be difficult but worth it. 2 weeks later, Tawan gave birth to a girl. She roared with laughter even between contractions. "Hail the world!" she shouted. "A warrior is born." The baby came fast, her tiny fists clenched like she was already ready to fight for joy. Alan kissed her forehead and said, "You've got your mother's fire." Lin's birth was quiet. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just gripped Alan's hand, and when the baby came a soft, sleepy girl, Lin wept silently. Alan wiped her tears, and they sat together in the half-darkness, 3 heartbeats overlapping. 3 children, 3 mothers, 1 man. The village danced. Children ran barefoot, throwing flower petals. Old women tied ribbons to trees and said the family had awakened a blessing long buried in the soil. But inside Alan, a question had started to grow. Could he stay? Could he live here forever? He missed his brother, missed books in English, missed coffee that didn't come in tin cans. But every time he thought of leaving, he'd walk into the house and see Malay asleep on the couch, baby on her chest, or Tawan making faces at her daughter, making her giggle until she hiccuped, or Lin humming to herself as she sewed new clothes. The baby nestled beside her. They had built a life that didn't need explaining. But reality waits. One day, a letter arrived forwarded from a government office. Alan's pension paperwork was incomplete. He would need to fly back to the US, sign documents, possibly stay a few months. The women were silent when he told them. Malay said, "We understand, but come back." Tawan joked, "We'll survive." Maybe. Lin just stared at the floor. Alan felt split. This wasn't a vacation anymore. This was a life, a family. But the outside world paperwork, money, legality still held part of him hostage. He kissed each child on the head that night, whispered his promises, and tried to ignore the growing inside his chest. He didn't want to choose, because for the first time, both sides of his life felt equally real. Alan stood at the edge of the village road with a small bag in his hand and tears he didn't bother to hide. Malay kissed his cheek. "Don't rush," she said, placing a small bundle of herbs in his pocket. "They'll keep you grounded." Tawan punched his shoulder gently. "Write to us, or I'll show up in Chicago and yell." Lynn didn't speak. She just placed the smallest of their daughters in his arms for one last hold. Then she stepped back, folded her hands, and nodded slowly. He left with a promise, but no guarantee. The city felt loud, even though it was only Landbatter. From there, he flew back to the States. Gray skies, fluorescent airports, paperwork, bank meetings, endless emails. He stayed in a rented apartment on the outskirts of his old town. No photos on the walls, just the ticking of a microwave clock and the distant hum of traffic. Nights were the worst. He dreamed of green fields, babies crying, Malay's soft laughter, Tawan's fierce grin, Lynn's quiet presence. The house he had built with them felt more real than the ground under his feet. Every letter he wrote began with "I miss you." Weeks turned into months. He wired money back to the village. He bought 3 baby carriers online and shipped them. He found a way to enroll the children in a Mongolian ID-based registry so their futures would be less complicated. And then, he bought for plane tickets, not to bring them here, but to go back together. When Alan returned to the village, he was thinner, older, but something behind his eyes had settled. The kind of peace you only find after wandering far enough to know what really matters. The reunion was not loud. Malay saw him first, her hands covered in flour. She froze. Tawan came out of the house, looked at him, then laughed so loud that birds scattered from a tree nearby. Lynn stepped into view last. She didn't cry. She just walked over, wrapped her arms around his waist, and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, as they all sat on the porch, the children asleep in hammocks nearby, Alan looked at the stars and said, "I thought I was coming back to a place, but I was really coming back to people." There was no need to explain. In the distance, the river moved slowly. The crickets sang, and under a sky full of unfamiliar constellations, a man in his 50s, once lost, once divorced, once alone, held the hands of 3 women who had chosen him without permission from the world. Love, after all, is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it builds a life no one could ever imagine quietly, fully, forever. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it and subscribe for more true stories that defy everything we think we know about love, family, and belonging.